Okay, everyone. So as you can see for this unit, I went a little bit overboard with it being called a poster session. So I actually created a bit of a poster to help with actually explaining everything. So if I don't get to everything in this video, you can go back through. There are a bunch of little purple sound recordings that I've recorded about each of the different parts. I've got my Google Apps here, I've got quizzes, I've got Flipgrid, all of which have links to the sites or to the specific materials that I'm using for this lesson. If you are interested in this lesson, you can just click this little link section up here, and I have actually attached my lesson plan for this section, showing where I'm using synchronous and where I'm using asynchronous tools in my actual lesson. So just a little bit here before we get going. You guys can see it's not done because I'm actually recording the screencast right now, so that's going to be here, and I'm going to provide that when we go into the actual posting of this lesson. So first thing, it's really taken me a long time in this class to really think about what I've actually learned from everything in this 7 weeks. And it's honestly been a lot. I wasn't sure. I could have never told you that I wanted to be an online teacher before now, but after taking this class, I could see it actually being a possibility in the future. Teaching an online science class has always been one gigantic hurdle because I strongly believe in the hands-on nature of a science class, and I think that that is incredibly, incredibly important. The role of a teacher in an online class, you should be a facilitator of learning, but being that it is in an online setting, I think it is really important that the teacher is able to kind of be student-centered more than teacher-centered. I know in a lot of commonplace settings, I would think of online instruction as being more teacher-centered, facilitative, with a lecture-based class. And I also think it's really important that a teacher is a community builder and in a setting where immediacy is not as given as it is in a brick and mortar school. For my lesson that I chose to kind of talk about here, I went off of a discussion that I had about my worksheet that I accessed last week. I'm going to be talking about physical and chemical change, and basically being able to tell the difference between physical changes and chemical changes. I'm going to be using Google Apps, which was reviewed by one of my classmates, and I'm also going to be using Flipgrid, which was reviewed by a separate classmate last week when we were reading about the accessibility of different tools. I use synchronous and asynchronous methods, which I will talk about when we get farther in. And I'll talk about ahas at the end. For my lesson, as you can see, I use a learning-focused lesson plan. For this lesson, you can see that I am covering physical and chemical changes in the unit of matter. It is for a 6th grade physical science class, and I'm using the standard differentiate between physical and chemical changes. My essential question is, what are physical and chemical changes? To activate this lesson, I would start by screen sharing a picture of a paper, and through a shared Google Slide screen, I would give the students the opportunity to write up what is a physical and chemical property of the paper, and on the following pages, what exactly they would do to change the physical properties of the paper and how they could change the chemical properties of the paper. Before we even did that, I would actually have students asynchronously read. What I used as the basis for my lesson was a science fusion book, which is what I use in my brick and mortar school. So they would read pages, complete the activity on page 35 and read pages 36 to 43. Upon meeting in class in a synchronous setting, I would review the content that we covered in each reading assignment and introduce the lab stations, which I'll show you in a second on my Google Classroom. The lab stations, basically, what I did was I provided students right here with the opportunity to choose what kind of station they wanted to do. So if they clicked that link, it would open up a PowerPoint slide with a ton of different procedures that students would have to follow to do their lab, and it incorporates student choice. It allows students the opportunity. I wrote down here, please do not take a lab that another student is doing, and what they would do asynchronously later after this class would be over. They would actually go to Flipgrid and they would make a Flipgrid post on a board that I had created that would allow students to actually show what they had learned. Oh, I can't open it that easily. Okay, that's fine. I'll get that open later. Going back into my lesson, I also said that to assess my students' learning, I would have them do a physical or chemical change quizzes. So if I click over here, you can see I have also provided a link to the quizzes game. I'd have to look back to get the code for that one as well. But basically, it's kind of like Kahoot in the sense that students are answering questions to really understand their learning, and basically it gives me a rundown of what questions were the least understood and which ones were the most understood by color coding them. Green, yellow, red. It shows me a percentage of students that were getting answers correct and a percentage of students that were not. It doesn't show any of the students which ones got which answers, but it does kind of make it a game where students are getting points for how quickly they answer and if they answer it correctly or not. Going on from that, what I would do is in an asynchronous setting, as I showed you before, on the stream, students would post which one of the ones they had. They would record and post it on the Flipgrid. Students would then make observations. So last week I was reviewing, I don't have it open right now, I was reviewing the physical and chemical change worksheet, which I have right here. So students would go in, it makes a copy for each different student, so students would be able to type directly into this lab. So students could put on here what they actually think physical change is, what chemical change is, what the law of conservation of mass is. And I would actually alter this a little bit based on what students chose to do. If I had more students, I would have to add more boxes. If I had less students, I would have to take some away. If students had provided their own lab that they wanted to do with a procedure that I okayed, I would change up what they had in here. Right now I just have what I have on the PowerPoint that was shared to students. And there are some follow-up questions that I ask students to complete as well. So that is all to be done asynchronously on the student's own time so that they have enough time to actually do the materials, do what they need to do, get everything that they need to get done. And I asked them to submit their observations on Google Classroom after they were finished. When we met up again, I would actually have students break out into their breakout groups. I would separate them into rather small groups so that they have enough time to really discuss with one another their observations that they made of the different data. I would give them about 10 minutes to discussion, although that's flexible. I would go in and out of the different breakout sessions to kind of see where their discussions were. Then I would introduce our class project, which I described a little bit last week when I was talking about my presentation, the accessibility of my one worksheet in the course of my whole lesson. Basically what I would have them do is I would have them create their own method of sharing what a physical or chemical change was. Oh shoot, I forgot to talk about that. Before they would do that, I would actually have them, sorry, I am jumping ahead of myself here. I would have them come back and poll and hold discussions about about each of the physical and chemical changes and kind of go over why certain ones were physical and why certain ones were chemical, making sure they understand how the properties interconnect with one another. Okay, so back to the project. Afterwards, they would submit project ideas on the live class, which would allow other students to hear what project ideas were and possibly help them create groups. I don't require that students work in groups for this project, but if they wish to work with another student, I don't have a problem with that. So a couple ideas that my classes have done in the past. They've created songs, they've created skits, or they've recorded videos, they've made games on Scratch, they've made stop motion videos, they've made Google Draw posters, they've made actual physical posters that they've done. They've created websites, they've created wikis, they've created pretty much anything that you can think of. Raps. But I would allow my students to come up with their project ideas to really showcase their talents and allow them to take ownership of their work. Finally, I would have students create and submit their projects by the deadline, and after all students were submit, I would have them do a gallery walk through the submitted materials on the Google Classroom server. So in my Google Classroom, I have my stream, which kind of updates everything, and honestly, you can move different posts up to the top. So I'm going to actually move that one to the top so that it shows up first. It also lists, you can see some people had commented from my classes before. These are just the adults that voluntarily joined my class for the 1 week that we had it. In the classwork section, I kind of separate it. Up here at the top, I have today. So in the first class, I would be having the quizzes. So the quizzes game link is up in today. But down at the bottom, I provided all of the resources that they need. Down here, I've got a project rubric that I actually scheduled for a later release, which I thought is a kind of cool feature on Google Classroom. But before I upload this to the actual class discussion, I'm going to open it up so you can see all of the materials. I also provided a netiquette guide for my classroom, which all students would be required to read before they began my class, kind of going off of couple of Rice's principles, basic things about how to interact in an online environment. Finally, before I get done here, my ahas for this class. This class has been really eye-opening to me as a teacher. Learning about the accessibility of materials was one of the most eye-opening things that I've done in any of my grad classes so far. Taking the time to really look at things that I've created and decide, is this a good resource for individuals with special needs or special accommodations that they need? And how can I make it so that I'm not singling anyone out, that I'm making materials that will really help anyone that needs? How can I make it so that students who have a visual impairment can understand what I'm using a picture to actually discuss? That can reach the curb cutting effect, where basically I am taking something that benefits a small minority and really making it benefit the majority by providing a recap of something I might have said in class that they might not get from just looking at the materials if they weren't able to attend a class a day. And finally, synchronous and asynchronous tools. In every one of my posts that I've posted since the second week of class, I've talked about synchronous versus asynchronous, because reading that and really having to think about what would be appropriate to have in an online face-to-face meeting versus what would be better to do individually on your own really was eye-opening to me and has really changed how I've run everything in my face-to-face classroom as well. I have students do a lot of reading outside of class. I don't have them sit there silently while we're in there. I use that time primarily for observation, collaboration, lab time, and actually doing hands-on work. And it has really changed my teaching methods as a whole. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this. I will get this all uploaded soon. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And if you have any materials that you would like to share with me, please don't hesitate to do so. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and have a nice rest of your weekend.